We are a very large enterprise collectively. We are a federation of 154 different local autonomous companies, they're nonprofits with their own CEOs, their own boards, and their own territories. And so I run the organization that sits sort of on top of the federation. It's 100% about the mission. I had, throughout my career, had different opportunities to work with people with various needs, either kind of on boards or certainly when I was in the federal government directly. Building those capabilities because those foundations will serve you for the rest of your career. And as you go through your career, never stop learning, never stop asking questions, never stop developing yourself.
Welcome to On Board with Transparent Leadership and Easter Seals podcast. I'm Kendra Davenport, President and CEO of Easter Seals, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Steve Preston, who is President and CEO of Goodwill Industries International. Really happy to have you here, Steve.
Thanks, Kendra. It's really a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, I've been eager to talk with you, and I'll give everybody a little bit of background. You are what I like to think of as a unicorn. You have private sector experience, you have government experience, you have nonprofit experience, you have basically done it all. So in a nutshell, I'd love for you to start off by telling our listeners how you came to be at Goodwill. And I know you've been there about 5 years. What led you to this job?
It's 100% about the mission. I had, throughout my career, had different opportunities to work with people with various needs, either kind of on boards or certainly when I was in the federal government directly. And I had increasingly developed a deep concern for adults who are what I would say sort of on the outside of society looking in, people who've had difficult pathways, people who maybe have made difficult decisions in their lives, and as a result are unable to move forward in their lives. And it's just such a missed opportunity for all of us. And so I believe very deeply in the potential of every individual and very deeply in the need to provide every individual with the opportunity to realize that potential. And so I actually wrote a personal mission statement for myself and about 15 months or so later, I got a call about the Goodwill job, and my personal mission statement was effectively what the Goodwill job was. And so, it was the issue set that concerned me deeply. I decided to figure out how to commit my life to it, and I felt like it was a providential call when I got the call for the Goodwill role.
So I love that. Talk a little bit, if you can, about how this differs from previous roles you've had. How does the nonprofit sector, and Goodwill's a very, very large NGO. So how does it differ from previous roles you've had, whether there be in the private sector or in government positions with HUD or Small Business Association?
Yeah, so it probably feels a little bit more like a private sector role. And so because we are a very large enterprise collectively, we are a federation of 154 different local autonomous companies, they're nonprofits with their own CEOs, their own boards, and their own territories. And so I run the organization that sits sort of on top of the federation. And so we work very hard to help every one of those 154 local organizations be as effective as possible locally by providing them services. So it feels a lot more like a business enterprise because our local organizations deal with business issues every day, both in the retail market, many times business services, but also in how they deliver services to people in need, because that is also part of our organizational structure. So for me, one of the exciting things about this is I love running businesses. That's what I've done in my life, right? I've been CEO of 2 companies, CFO of 2 companies, and I love working with those local organizations on their business issues. The difference is twofold. Number one is those are all autonomous organizations, and I'm a service organization that supports them. So historically, when I've run companies, I've sort of run the whole operations, and it's all been sort of part of my purview. This is a little different, right? There's a real, one of the really nice parts about that is those individual organizations understand their local communities. They deal with other local nonprofits. They have their local boards, and they're incredibly committed to those local needs. But it can be a little bit more challenging at times to align people where we think there's value in aligning them. The other piece is every day when I get up, I think about the impact that this remarkable federation has on people in deep need, and specifically people in the mission area that I just mentioned. And so that's a fundamentally different kind of motivator for me than working in a company. Now, I believe there is great value in being a good leader of a company because I think the private sector fuels our economy, and it's where most people work. It's where most people spend most of their time, and it's essential to have really effectively operating, kind of well-run corporations. But the motivation in this job, is connected to something very different. It's definitely something that fuels me.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I've been in nonprofit my entire career and definitely feel motivated. I've had some opportunities to go into the private sector and just nothing ever materialized, but I think that's okay. My children, when I took this job, and they said, "So you'll be running the show?" And I said, "Well, sort of. We have 70 CEOs, about half the size, a little bit less than half the size of Goodwill." And I explained to them, those are all independent, not unlike, the Goodwills that you manage or sit above. And two of my children just laughed out loud and they said, "So you have to democratize all your decision making? This is going to be really good for you, Mom. You're going to learn a lot." And I think it's true, Steve. It definitely makes things more challenging.
Yeah. I'd also say, though, it also can make things much more successful. Our local CEOs are, we've just got some just tremendously talented people. They bring really good insight into how to address issues. They give us good insight in terms of what they need and what they don't need, and it helps us do our jobs better. And we work very much hand in glove with the local leaders to understand how to design our services and our support to make sure we're hitting the mark and supporting them in ways that they need, and that we're not doing things that are irrelevant or superfluous. Because at the end of the day, we touch people through those local organizations, and if my team can help them, it can help the local organizations be more effective in doing that, then that's how we win. We win by helping them win.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. And I do feel every time I'm in the presence of one of our CEOs or their team, I learn. I come away with a different perspective, one I maybe hadn't considered. And the CEOs and their teams that make up our affiliates, not unlike what you just described, they are the experts in their fields. And I'm often asked, what are your biggest challenges with your programs? And I say, I don't have any challenges with the programs. Our CEOs and our affiliates do a terrific job. My challenges come sometimes, not always, but sometimes in building consensus among the affiliates, all of which are different. And I wonder if you could talk to that a little bit, because you, I'm sure, encounter some of the same things that I do in very similar organizations in many ways. I think Easter Seals and Goodwill complement each other. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with consensus building now that you've been in this seat for 5 years?
Yeah. So among our 154 local organizations, we have organizations that range in revenue from 3 million to 300 million, right? Different levels of size, different levels of staffing as a result, different kinds of programs. So, we need to be able to be supportive to all of those members, and many of them, as a result, have very different needs. And they have different views of the world, and they work in different markets, right? So somebody might be serving more heavily in rural markets, somebody urban, somebody in a tech market, somebody in a hospitality market. And so we need to figure out how to bring support to them. And what we have found is, and we have a large body of services that we've developed, especially over the last 5 years. We just finished a big strategic plan. And in that, we built a lot of different capabilities supported by a lot of different technologies for people. And what we find is different people value different services, based on that. So we need to make sure that the group of services we offer, that everybody gets value somehow out of that basket of services. And we'll have some people leaning heavily into one. So, for example, one of the things we do is on-site consultations for people to help them develop their retail capabilities. Some members have very large, very sophisticated, very high-functioning retail operations. Some can use that support from us. So other cases on sort of the high functioning ones, those people may want our data and technology services a lot more because they have staffs that can analyze it and do all sorts of other things. So we need to make sure that what we do, that everybody gets value out of what we do, and that it lands in a way that is uniquely valuable to the organization and their needs.
I wanted to work this in and I didn't know where there would be a good spot, but my second job out of college was with Goodwill. I worked for Morgan Memorial Goodwill Industries in Boston. And
that's the mothership. That's where we started.
I know. I know. It was terrific. It was a terrific experience. And one of the things I came away from that experience with was real insight, I think, in how to relate to people. At the time, Deborah Jackson was the CEO. And I don't know if you know Deborah or if you've ever crossed paths. She's just a very people-oriented person. And I used to watch and think, gosh, she's the CEO, and yet she greets everyone the same way, whether it's a program participant or a member of our staff or a visitor. And that her demeanor was something I've always kept with me. And I wonder if you could speak to how you, if there are any hallmarks of how you engage with your team, how you relate to your team, and to, Goodwill teams writ large across the country. Is there anything that is intrinsically unique to you, Steve, in the way you approach your employees?
Yeah, so I love that story, by the way, and I think it really is. It captures the spirit of who we are, because in every person we see dignity, we see potential, and we see an opportunity for our own commitment to support that person if it's a person in need. So we really, our starting point is in that place, and if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to care about people the way that we should. I think for me as a leader, I am. I think it is really important for me, especially given the complexity of this organization and many of the ones that I've learned, is to listen really hard to what people say. I mean, and to look hard at what they're doing and take that in and use that to not only encourage them, but actually take a step back and say, what is my role in helping that person move forward? Right. So for example, on my team, my rule is if somebody on the team needs me for something, like stop the engines, get them to me. Like I want them to know that I support them. I want them to know that they have my best thinking. I want them to know that I will put shoulder to the wheel. Same in the field. If people have issues, if I hear about them, it's really important for me to take that in, to understand it, and to turn it into something that's real, right? It's not only showing empathy, it's actually turning that into action and support. And that's kind of how I think about doing my job. I'm a pretty hard driver. So, sometimes I have to kind of keep that in check. But behind that is, I think, a real desire to move the ball forward. And I never want to be an impediment for people. I never want them to feel anything less than full support. And that's just kind of how I view the world.
Hard driver. Is that code for type A?
Yeah. If you looked at my strength finders, it would be all of that stuff. Achievers, the first one, responsibility, confidence, strategy, belief. It's like all
Yep.
the,
Yep.
we can get it done. Let's make it happen. Let's take the hill.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I think
And
that's
so
intrinsic
that's,
with,
that,
yeah, many leaders.
it is. It is. But you know what? I think the important thing about the work we do is so much of what we need to do comes from our heart and from our deep beliefs in what is right. And I think without that overlay and without that motivation, you're sort of driving something that's, like, where's this going and why am I doing it? Right. So, and that's again why I loved your story, because at the end of the day, having that demeanor and that focus on other people is something that, if we can lead with that and have that deep concern be our fuel, everything else kind of comes into line.
How do you refuel? Right? Hard drivers, type A's, people who are achievers, put, I think you said, shoulder in. You put your best foot always into your work.
Yeah.
I know you have a large family. I'd love for you, if you don't mind, to talk about that and whether or not your family fuels, who you are, Steve, how you refill your cup when it's empty. Because I think as leaders, sometimes that depletion is real, and it's important for us to be able to replenish, to recharge, to just take a step back and make sure we're doing okay. How do you do that?
Well, you mentioned my family. I've got 5 children, all in their 20s. Actually, I should say they've got me. I'm not sure.
And
just the and the best wife in the world. So there's definitely a lot of joy and a lot of a strong foundation there. I'm also a person of strong faith, and I very much take a step back. And when the stresses of life are really severe, I do take a step back, and I really try to think about the bigger picture of life, and especially leading an organization with such a strong mission. The value of our mission and how getting through stresses should be irrelevant if you're thinking really about driving the mission forward and making an impact there. And the third thing is, I have to tell you, fitness is really important for me. I've been an avid cyclist for over 35 years. I'm still one. I mountain bike, road bike, gravel bike, and probably too aggressively than especially the mountain biking. I should be doing that less aggressively. The falls are harder to recover from, and sometimes end up with a doctor's visit. But I'd see it's those 3 things, and they're all really important for me. And I know that in all of that, I'm incredibly blessed to be able to have those sources to recharge.
That's great. And you and I could have a conversation offline about all of those things, because I think the same way. My family, my children are in their 20s, all 3 of mine, and they are a blessing and sometimes a trial, but I do learn a lot from my children. Depend on my family. Faith, very important to me. Exercise, not quite as much as you, but I have a husband who's an avid mountain biker, and I've recently had the conversation with him that, he doesn't bounce as well as he used to, and maybe he shouldn't go so hard. So I think you're aligned there.
I said, it's probably not a problem to ride this hard, but it is a problem to fall this hard. So
for sure. Talk to me a little bit. I've been at this a long time. I have never deviated from the nonprofit sector. So I have I have strong opinions about everything, but I have very strong opinions about where the nonprofit sector is today. And I'll just give you a little bit of insight. I really believe that for NGOs to thrive, they need to put collaboration first, right? They really need to use your expression, put their shoulder into collaborating, and not just with corporations, but with other NGOs. And whether you disagree or agree, I'd love to hear your perspective on the nonprofit world today, how Goodwill fits, and some of the things that you think about as you operate, one of the largest NGOs in the country.
Yeah. So I agree with you 100%. I do think nonprofits need to collaborate. And locally, when you think about serving people in need, people's needs vary. They're often multifaceted. And unless you have sort of a collective impact model that works locally, you'll miss the opportunity to support people the way they need to be supported. So, for example, our model for delivery is one that taps into support from other organizations. So let me just kind of lay this out. If somebody comes into a Goodwill and let's say there's a job training program that they want to participate in, we typically will do an assessment of their skills, where they want to go in their job, what the pathway to get there is. But you know what? Helping somebody get digital skills, if they've got 4 other challenges in life and have never been on that pathway before, isn't going to be successful. They probably need a job coach or a career navigator is what we call them. They may need transportation support. They may need housing. They may need childcare. They may need mental health support. In many cases, we're seeing that. And so if we don't have a body of partners locally that we can refer people to help them through that journey to be successful, our ability to succeed in helping them move into a job successfully is going to be significantly diminished, because people have multifaceted needs, and you're supporting a whole person with a whole body of needs. But if we can do that effectively, we help them collectively. We help them move through all of those challenges, and ultimately land in a role where they can be successful and provide for themselves and their families, and hopefully move forward in their lives.
Mm-hmm. You talk about one, just personally. I don't necessarily mean RE Goodwill, but to you personally, what's one value you believe has to exist in an organization for things to work, for people to like working there, for people to work together?
I think in terms of lots of things, so it's hard to boil it down to one. But I have always worked in service organizations. I've never been part of a manufacturer or research. I've always been in service organizations. And one overriding factor in all of those organizations is everything you do, every bit of your success is based on what your people are doing, throughout a complex service delivery process. And you have people that work on those processes. You have people doing all sorts of things, but then you have the front line talking to customers or people that you serve. And if you don't have a culture that helps those people engage, allows those people to flourish, and very importantly, brings the best thinking of the organization together, irrespective of what the level of the person is, you will miss an opportunity to be a great corporation. And there have been a couple of times when I've been in the middle of very significant turnarounds where I think the biggest problem we had is all sorts of communication blockage everywhere. And as a result, an inability to move forward and resolve issues. And in 2 cases, I came into a real collapse of the organization. And it's also extremely hard to unravel those challenges and build a different kind of esprit de corps and engagement and commitment when that brokenness exists in an organization. But it lies with the people and the effective functioning of those people as partners in a healthy ecosystem or not.
Switch gears with me for a second. If you could, tell us, did you see yourself in this kind of a role 3, 4, 5 years ago? Or is this a surprise to you that you're here, where you are?
That's a great question. So after I left the government, I ran a company, we sold it, I ran another company. And it's funny, before I went in the government, I had a real pull to do something different in my life that had made a different kind of impact, even though I had 5 little kids at home and a great job and everything was going really well. And then I flipped and went to the government and moved everybody to Washington. But I had a real real sense of calling that I wanted to have a different kind of contribution in life. And then after the government, I left and I went back to the private sector. But then after the second company, I felt that same pull again. And so I was very open to what the possibilities were. And I did not go into it with any preconceived notions of what the next thing would be. So I knew that nonprofit was a possibility. I knew that I was built or am built sort of as a business person, and I've led a number of organizations. So that I had to acknowledge that there are many organizations I would not have been probably happy in. But I wasn't surprised that I ended up in a nonprofit. I was surprised that I was able to land in a nonprofit that was so completely connected with what I cared the most about, and also very much connected to where I thought my skills were.
It's great. Talk to me about productivity hacks. Is there one thing you do that helps you be as productive as you can be? And I'll give you an example. I am a really early riser, and if I don't have the opportunity to have that mental headspace between, like, I don't know, 4:30 and 6:30 a.m., I find my day doesn't go as well. I like that time to have that time unfettered. And yeah, it is kind of kooky to get up that early, but it actually helps me be more productive throughout the day when I have that. Is there something that helps you be productive or that you rely upon to get things done and be as effective and your best self as you can?
Yeah, it's not unlike what you just said. In fact, it's pretty similar. I know, and given the role you have, the work is multifaceted and requires different kinds of thinking. I am often, up to my eyeballs in data or operational issues, business design issues. I might be doing a podcast like right now, or doing media or giving a speech. I might have board meetings. I might be meeting with groups of members. So the preparation and the thinking through of those things are very different and require me to invoke a different part of my brain and energy based on what it is. So, not dissimilar from what you just said, I find if I'm going to sit down and I really need to think through a complex issue or write something, or I need a space, and it is usually in the morning. I'll try to block out time in the morning, or be that as it may, it's often on the weekends, where I can just not be bothered by secondary issues and just devote that mental space. And I will tell you, the best days I have are when I open up my calendar and the first meeting's at 10:30, and I just, I'm a machine.
Yep. Yep.
I get through it. I think through it.
Having that executive time.
I'm 10 times more efficient.
Yeah.
It is so important.
Totally agree.
And then often, it's knowing where you're the best. It's knowing what the requirements are and where you're the best in meeting those requirements in the space that you have, and then leaning into those areas of productivity.
Tell me one thing we can't Google about you that no one would know. I know, interesting question, right?
When you're in the federal, my job's in the federal government. I was running agencies, and the way that it works is in the agencies. So, for example, at HUD, my picture would be on the wall next to the president's picture, right? It happens that way in all the buildings. So people have this image of you based on video speeches, based on pictures of you. And this has happened to me so many times, where people would get in the elevator with me and see me for the first time and say, I thought you'd be taller. And I'm about 5'6". I'm about 150 pounds. I'm not a big person. I'm not, I'm kind of, good things come in small packages. But I haven't seen that on any news reports. But it was always one of these things.
I love
where
that.
people
And
then the other thing I think is, like what made you feel like it was okay to say that? which of course I didn't care.
I've
I've
actually
got
had
two
the
sons
same
that are,
thing.
significant.
I've actually had people say the same thing, and
Yeah.
in this hybrid world where we're on the phone so much, and people see this much of us, shoulders up. I've had
Yeah.
several people here at Easter Seals say, "Oh God, I thought you were much taller than you are," and I think, well, why? You've only ever seen my shoulders, but I think it's I just think it's the way you present yourselves. Maybe that's
Right.
it.
You just got to say, obviously, a different kind of stature was coming through the video screen.
There you go. You got to take the positive, right? Look at it through a positive perspective. Tell me, if you can, what is one thing you think people misunderstand about you or don't get right?
I think, especially because of the kinds of roles I've had, where um, Goodwill is a massive organization, right? And it's got a big name attached to it. I was incredibly blessed in my government roles, but I was on the cabinet. I did a lot of media, and I've run companies. And I often say, I think my resume gets there before I do, and and people can make a lot of assumptions about you based on titles and roles. And I'll never forget when I was a CFO of a company. I was CFO of a pretty sizable company, and somebody came into my office to present some materials, and I could tell he was really nervous and was kind of having a hard time with the presentation. And when he left, I said to one of my colleagues, like, what was the issue with that guy? Like, he's like, don't you know, like, he was really nervous to be presenting to you. And I said, but like, why? Like, it's just me, right? Like, I'm just like, and my wife used to joke that when I'd come home from work after in the administration, we had 5 little kids at the time. And she's like, it's amazing because you're coming home from the White House and we've got 2 kids wiping their nose on your leg, right? So there's assumptions. And I think
check your ego at the door, right?
I'm a super down to earth person. I actually think I just love talking to anybody and hearing their story. I came from, a pretty humble upbringing, and my parents much more so. And so I connect with, I often just connect with different people than I see every day, and love to do that. And so I think people make assumptions about who you are, but at my core, I'm probably something that looks very different than what you would see on my resume.
Thank you for that. I'm sure that's true. And my husband worked for 2 administrations, and we used to tell him when he came home, you're just dad here. You're just dad. You gotta empty the dishwasher.
Yeah. You know what? You don't want to be anything else than dad there.
Yep.
Like, you don't want that stuff.
That's so true.
Right. And certainly when I was in the government, I really felt the need to get away from it, because my role and the public nature of my role was beginning to infuse itself into the lives of my children. And we moved away from Washington and to a place where they were on the corner with the school bus and nobody really knew about it. You don't want to be the job title. You want to be the human being.
That's so true. That's so true. Talk a little bit. I have just a couple more questions for you. I really appreciate your time, Steve. As a parent, is there anything you bring to your role as the head of Goodwill that you think resonates or is borrowed from your role, your very active, engaged role as a parent? Are there life lessons that you bring from parenting 5 children, now, young adults, to your job?
Yeah, it may be good or bad. I probably tend to be a fairly paternalistic person anyway. And I'm the guy who will unfortunately tell anybody advice. And, if they're going somewhere, I'll draw the map for them before they leave. And so, but it's pretty natural for me to go into a situation with somebody else and feel an accountability to them as people, even very difficult people. I often wonder what my accountability is in those places to change the relationship or the situation. And so I think as a parent, what's really important is you see the reaction of your child or the behavior of your child in the context of what they're going through personally and what they're going through life. And so often the people we deal with in the workplace, we deal with the, we may deal with behaviors or reactions that we don't always attach to what they're going through in life. Um, and and so I often find myself in a situation where I say, okay, that was a difficult meeting. That was a difficult engagement. I wonder if there's something else going on there right now. And in fact, just yesterday, I
And
was in a
empathy.
situation where there was something going on, and I realized after I got off the call that the person was actually sick. Number one, dealing with not feeling well, and number two, under a tremendous amount of pressure. And there were things coming out in that conversation, I think, that were indicative of both the stress and the emotion and the just the physical situation that he was in. So I took a step back and said, actually, I need to reach back out to that person and listen to what's going on, and hopefully come out of that in a better situation as a result.
Mhm. I have a very good friend who's told me many times, you're only ever as happy as your saddest child. And I think that is
Yeah,
true of all parents, right? We live through our children. And I
sure.
think I love your response because I feel the same way. I think it is very easy to become detached from what people are in their personal lives or what they're grappling with. And as the leader, you're driving forward. You're a hard driver. I think I am too. And I always want to try and stay in touch with the fact that at the end of the day, we're all human, right? This is a job, or an
Mhm.
avocation maybe, but it is a job. And I think that empathy is intrinsic in many parents who really enjoy parenting, who enjoy that role. I think you bring it into your work role. And just to build on something you said you used the word advice. If you were to be asked by someone, and I'm sure you are because I am frequently asked by somebody who's much more junior than you in their career, just starting out, what would be, what they could do to get ahead, what they should do to advance professionally? What would be your advice? What's your stock answer? Is there something that is standard advice that you think everyone, regardless of their role, needs to do this or should focus on this?
Yeah. Well, I actually get asked this question a fair amount. I'm pretty open to talking to people's children, to talking to people mid-career. And the one thing I tell, especially young people, is um, assuming you're landing in a place that you want to be, and you're using your gifts, et cetera, invest in learning and development, especially early in your career, and never stop investing in learning and development. Um, it's really it's not uncommon for me to talk to people saying, I'm 22 and I want to start my own business and this is what I hope to do. And if that's the way you're built and you're ready to do it, fine. But I often say, um, you know, think hard about where you hope to end up and whether or not you're building capabilities and building technical capabilities, building organizational capabilities, seeing how things work, building those capabilities, because those foundations will serve you for the rest of your career. And as you go through your career, never stop learning, never stop asking questions, never stop developing yourself. Um, because I often get concerned that people will end up 4, 5, 6 years down the road and they just don't have basic competencies that they should have, that they need to fulfill their aspirations. And I started out right out of business school at a large financial services firm where I was, oh my gosh, it was like boot camp every day. And you know, 20 years later, more than 20 years later, when I was, the housing secretary, and I was right in the middle of the housing and financial crisis. In fact, I was on the board of the TARP. What I learned at that financial services firm in the first 8 or 9 years of my career was very, very, beneficial for me in understanding what was happening in the world with all of these messy financial instruments and everything else going on, and it enabled me to be more effective in that place. And it would have never happened if I hadn't invested myself in the deep understanding and development earlier in my career. So people should never underplay that, and never and always feel like the painting is never done, right? You keep filling in throughout your life.
Great advice. I have so enjoyed talking with you, and have just wonder if there's anything you want to share about Goodwill Industries International before we go to our final question.
The thing I would say is this: we drive through neighborhoods in our cities where we look out the window and say, "Oh my goodness, like this just isn't getting any better," or "What do you do about this?" We look at people coming out of prison or coming out of addiction or whatever, and just sort of, attribute characteristics or have a sense of hopelessness about it. And what I would say is, I just firmly believe that every one of us should look at those people and say, there is an opportunity for more. There is an opportunity for support and a pathway for more that's not only good for that human being and their family, but that's good for our society, for our companies, for our culture, and everything, and for our economy, especially at a time when you've got 8 million unfilled jobs and employers are telling us that they can't find people with the skills they need. It is good for everybody if we can help people develop into their fullest potential and move into it, and to do that through training and development and ultimately career success. And so I think what I'd like to leave people with is to say, flip the script on who people are and what the possibilities are. And we need to commit together to helping people move forward.
Thank you. Great answer. We really like to end our episodes with Ask Me Anything, an Ask Me Anything segment. So stick around for that. But before we do, I want to ask Steve one final question. And anyone who knows me knows I read. I'm a voracious reader. I'm an insomniac, so I read all night. And I love books. What I want to know, and this I promise is my final question, is what's one book you would recommend that every leader should read? Is there a book?
Well, so, I've read, I think business books are very situational. A lot of other kind of books are situational. So I don't lean into one business book. I'm very much focused on, when I think about reading bigger issues in our society, big leaders and what they've done and how they've thought about things. And I kind of try to get myself into a bigger headspace than on a particular business issue. One book I've read, and it's a few years old right now, but I think we all feel just the weight of conflict in our society, and not only conflict, but contempt for each other in a way that's really destructive. And I actually think it's the greatest problem we have as a society, is our ability to put away preconceived notions and come together with openness and humility to address big problems. So a few years ago, Arthur Brooks, who's now a professor at Harvard, but he ran a big think tank and he's done a number of other things. He wrote a book called Love Your Enemies: How Decent People Can Save America from Our Culture of Contempt. And he really leaned into this space of caring about people and loving people and understanding who they are and coming to them with openness and humility to listen and find common understanding as we seek to solve the big issues. And I just loved the way he both named the severity of the challenge and put upon all of us the burden of moving forward by how we act, how we treat people, and even more importantly, what inside of us is happening and how we ultimately care about people. So it was a great book, Love Your Enemy, Arthur Brooks. And I think, it's a few years old, but it's still a book for our cultural moment. And as leaders, I think we have the ability to have a different kind of voice in these conversations.
I think that's a great book, given what's going on around us and the rise, I think, of vitriol and negativity and mean-spiritedness, not just in politics, but but across all industries. So great book. I will put that on my list. Where can our listeners go to
Right.
follow all the good work that Goodwill's doing?
Goodwill.org. You go to
All right.
goodwill.org. We've got all the good stuff.
Oh, well, terrific. Thank you so much, Steve. It's been a pleasure. Really, really, I'm grateful for your time and your insight. Loved our conversation.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it too.
Now on to Ask Me Anything. A friend of a listener asked them if she was too old to go back to nursing school. So the question is, what would you say to someone who wants to change careers but feels like they are too late or too old to do so? And I think this is a great question. I don't think you're ever too old to change careers or change your focus of your professional life. In fact, I think everything you do in your professional life is applicable to something else. And I think if you really want to make a change, say you want to go back to nursing and you're a teacher now, or you're in nonprofit and you want to go into sales in the private sector, you'll draw on the skills that your current job has helped you hone. And then it's just applying those skills. But I think more than anything, it's just believing in your capability, believing in yourself, having the confidence in yourself to say, I can make this change. I'm totally capable of this. All of us, I think, have in us multiple professions. And some of us, and I'm constantly amazed when I meet people throughout the Easter Seals network who say, I've been with Easter Seals 30 years. I've been here 20 years. That is incredible to me. And I think, could I have stayed one place? Maybe, maybe not. I think I tend to change jobs when I'm ready for more, when I'm ready for greater responsibility, and yet never deviated from the nonprofit sector. There is a part of me that has always wanted to go into the private sector, but I just never felt I could leave the nonprofit sector and be as fulfilled, because I think that's one of the benefits of working for a nonprofit whose mission you're passionate about. And yet, most of my dear friends work in the private sector and they love their jobs and they're completely fulfilled. And a few people I know have made radical changes. For example, worked in very successful private sector jobs and then started a business. That's something that appeals to me and my husband very much. So we think of that as our retirement gig. But I definitely think anyone can make a change. And I think it's all really in the way you perceive yourself and the way you view yourself and putting your best foot forward and you being your own best advocate. And instead of thinking negatively, like, I can't do that, or I'm not going to be good enough, or I don't possess the experience, or I'm too old. I just eschew that and really believe if you want it badly enough and you believe in yourself, you can make any change. Easter Seals empowers people with disabilities and their families to be full and equal participants in their communities and within society. Easter Seals is where everyone can feel welcomed and people know that they aren't judged, but treated with the dignity that they deserve. Each day, we provide life-changing services nationwide and advocate for policies that improve quality of life. From employment to housing services to job training, childcare and respite care, adult day programs, and so much more, Easter Seals is making a profound impact in thousands of communities every day. You can learn more by visiting easterseals.com. That concludes our episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you heard, be sure to write a review, like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to join us in the next episode as we discuss how we can all get on board with transparent leadership.